It all started with a letter. Not a welcome to the neighborhood fruit basket, not a friendly wave over the fence while you're dragging the recycling bin to the curb in your pajama pants. A letter, printed on paper so thick and self-important it probably had its own trust fund, the kind of paper that silently judges you for buying your stationery at a big-box store. This letter, which arrived on a Tuesday that was otherwise minding its own business, was not a greeting. It was a warning. And it was the first shot fired in what would later be known, at least in the private channels of my own mind, as the Great Shed War. 6 months before the letter, I had willingly signed myself into this pastel-colored prison. My partner Maya and I traded our wonderfully chaotic city apartment, a place where the ambient noise was a symphony of sirens, street musicians, and neighbors arguing about things that were definitely none of our business, for a house. A real house, with a mortgage that made my soul ache, and a backyard that was, essentially, a patch of dirt with ambitions. Maya called it our forever home. I called it the Beige Containment Unit. We were now residents of Harmony Creek, a suburban development so meticulously planned that it felt less like a community and more like a witness protection program for people with interesting pasts. Every house was a slight variation of the one next to it, painted in a color palette that ranged from aggressively taupe to existential grage. My personal hell on this particular Tuesday was taking the form of a flat-pack grill. The instructions, clearly translated from Swedish to Mandarin and then to English by a malfunctioning robot, showed a smiling, well-rested family enjoying perfectly cooked burgers. My reality was a pile of sheet metal, a bag of screws that contained at least 3 types not mentioned in the manual, and a growing sense of primal rage. "How's it going, honey?" Maya called from the sliding glass door, holding a glass of iced tea that felt like a mockery of my sweat-drenched state. "I think this is a CIA stress test," I grunted, trying to fit tab A into slot G, which seemed to defy the laws of physics. "I swear the instructions were written by a sadist with a grudge against the concept of leisure." She laughed. It was a sound I loved, but right then, it was the sound of a woman who had successfully assembled an entire IKEA bedroom set by herself. "Look, a robin," she said, pointing to the perfectly manicured lawn of our neighbor, Todd. I squinted at the bird. "That's not a robin, Maya. That's a scout for the neighborhood watch. It's judging the length of our grass. I can feel its tiny avian disapproval from here. This was my life now. Trading fire escapes for patios, brick walls for Todd's obsessively edged lawn. He didn't mow his lawn. He performed surgery on it. And the constant, high-pitched whir of his electric edger was giving me tinnitus and a deep-seated resentment for all things neat and tidy. To reclaim a sliver of my former, non-suburban self, I'd bought a shed. A simple, functional, dark gray metal shed. It was a bastion of utility in a sea of decorative nonsense, a place to store my tools, my bike, and the unassembled grill I was about to launch into orbit. It was unobtrusive, tucked away in the corner of the yard. It was perfect. Or so I thought. The shed went up on a Saturday. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. The speed and efficiency were, frankly, terrifying. I plucked it from the mailbox, the creamy, heavyweight cardstock feeling ominous in my hand. The embossed logo was a perfectly symmetrical oak tree, its branches forming a vaguely oppressive circle. It was from the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee, a title so grand it was clearly compensating for something. I opened it and read. "Dear Resident," it began, because using a name would have been far too personal. "It has come to our attention that a new accessory structure, outbuilding, has been erected at your property. While we appreciate your efforts to enhance your storage capabilities, we must remind you that all structures within Harmony Creek are subject to the community covenants conditions, and restrictions. I could feel my blood pressure rising. Maya came over and started reading over my shoulder. Your outbuilding, as it currently stands, is in violation of Guideline 11, Section B, Paragraph 4, which states, all exterior structures, including but not limited to sheds, gazebos, and playhouses, must match the primary residence in color and material to maintain a harmonious and aesthetically pleasing neighborhood environment. I read that line 3 times. Match the house? I said aloud. In material? Am I supposed to find a guy who can clad a 10 by 8 foot metal box in vinyl siding? Should I staple some bricks to the bottom? Maybe put a couple of tiny, non-functional shutters on it for curb appeal? Maya sighed. Oh, Leo. This isn't a letter, Maya, I said, waving it around. It's a declaration of war written on paper that costs more than my dignity. They're coming for my soul, one beige paint chip at a time. The letter concluded with a chirpy invitation to the monthly HOA meeting to discuss the path to compliance. That's how I found myself, 2 nights later, in a fluorescent-lit community room that smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. And that's where I met her. Brenda. Brenda was the HOA president, a woman in her late 50s with a perfectly coiffed helmet of blonde hair, a pastel pink blazer, and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She wielded her clipboard like a medieval flail. I waited my turn, and when she called my name, I approached the folding table she'd designated as her seat of power. Hi, Brenda. I'm Leo from 112 Willow Lane. I'm here about the shed. Ah, yes, she said, her smile tightening. The outbuilding. She said the word like it was a particularly nasty piece of graffiti. Right, so about the letter. I'm just trying to understand the match the material part. It's a metal shed. My house has vinyl siding and a brick facade. I just don't see how— Leo, she interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. We're not asking for the impossible. We are simply asking for compliance. The guidelines are here for a reason. They protect our property values. They maintain the aesthetic integrity of our community. She said aesthetic integrity, like it was a load-bearing wall in the temple of civilization. Okay, I get that, I said, trying to keep the sarcasm from boiling over. But practically speaking, what does compliance look like to you? She tapped her pen on her clipboard, a sharp, rhythmic sound that grated on my nerves. Well, she said, as if explaining a complex concept to a small child, a good first step would be to paint it. The approved color for your house's trim is whisper white, and the main siding color is desert taupe. That would go a long way toward tying it all together. She paused, looking me directly in the eyes. It just needs to match the house, Leo. The rules are very, very clear. The drive home was silent for the first 5 minutes. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Maya, sensing the impending volcanic eruption of pure frustration, stared out the passenger window. Just paint the shed beige, Leo, she finally said, her voice gentle. It's not worth the fight. It's a shed. No, I snapped, then immediately felt bad. I'm sorry, but it's not just a shed. It's the principle of the thing. This isn't a community, it's a cult of conformity. Brenda is the high priestess, and desert taupe is her sacrificial paint. If I give in on the shed, what's next? They'll say my welcome mat is too whimsical? My garden gnomes are ideologically unsound? Where does it end? Probably with them measuring the height of your grass with a ruler, she admitted. Which, by the way, Todd does. I groaned. We pulled into the driveway, the automatic garage door opening with a quiet hum that felt smug and compliant. I stomped through the house and onto the back patio, a cold beer in my hand. There it was, my handsome, dark gray shed standing in the corner like a sullen teenager at a family reunion, a monument to my failed attempt at individuality. I sat there for a long time, stewing. I stared at the shed, then at the back of our house. The bland, vinyl-sided, builder-grade house. Brenda's words echoed in my head, a demonic mantra of suburban oppression. It needs to match the house, it needs to match the house, it needs to match the house. She said it with such finality, such unwavering certainty. But the phrase itself, it was so simple, so open to interpretation if you were, say, a professional creative who specialized in visual communication and had a deep-seated resentment for arbitrary authority. Match the house. She never specified how it had to match. My designer brain, the part of me that spends all day thinking about kerning and color theory and how to visually convey an idea, started to whir. An idea, a terrible, beautiful, magnificently petty idea, began to bloom in the darkness of my despair. It was an idea so audacious, so perfectly absurd, that I almost laughed out loud. I grabbed my tablet, the one I use for graphic design work, and opened my sketching app. My fingers flew across the screen. First, a simple rectangle, the shed. Then, I started drawing on the shed. I sketched the brick foundation of my house, then the vinyl siding, the back door, the two windows on either side, the gutters, the slight discoloration on the siding where the builder's crew had messed up the power washing. I didn't just sketch it, I rendered it. I imagined the light, the shadows, the texture. Maya slid the door open and stepped onto the patio. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I turned the tablet to face her, a manic grin spreading across my face. Her eyes widened. She stared at the sketch, her brain trying to process what she was seeing. It was a picture of our house, perfectly rendered onto the side of the shed. "I have a plan," I said, my voice buzzing with newfound purpose. "Brenda said it needs to match the house. Fine. I will make this shed match this house so perfectly, so hyper-realistically, that from the right angle it will become invisible. It's bulletproof, Maya. It complies with the rule in the most aggressive, literal way possible. What can she say?" "It matches the house too much?" Maya looked from the tablet to me, her mouth slightly agape. A slow smile spread across her face. "Leo," she whispered, a hint of awe in her voice. "You are an absolute menace." "I'm just a guy who follows the rules," I said, my grin widening. "A real stickler for the guidelines. Let them come. I will be a legend." The difference between a madman and a visionary is execution. I knew my idea was brilliant, but I also knew that my artistic skills were primarily digital. Painting a hyper-realistic mural on a corrugated metal surface required a level of practical know-how I simply didn't possess. My grand vision could easily end up looking like a kindergarten art project after the first rainstorm if I didn't prep the canvas correctly. I needed a professional. I needed a contractor. More than that, I needed an accomplice. My search began, as all modern quests do, on the internet. I called 3 local painting companies with 5-star reviews, all of whom had websites featuring photos of pristine living rooms and perfectly lacquered front doors. The first call was with a guy named Kevin from Prestige Painters. He sounded young, eager, and completely unprepared for my request. "Hi, Kevin," I started, trying to sound as normal as possible. "I have an outdoor painting job. It's a standard 10x8 metal shed. I need it professionally prepped, sanded, cleaned, and primed with the absolute best exterior metal primer you've got. It needs to be a perfect canvas." "No problem, sir," Kevin chirped, the sound of furious typing in the background. "Happy to help. We can get that done for you next week. And what color are you thinking? We have a great deal on Grage Expectations this month. Very popular in Harmony Creek." I took a deep breath. "Actually, Kevin, I'll be handling the color myself. See, I'm an artist, and I'm going to be painting a photorealistic mural of my house directly onto the shed." The typing stopped. A profound silence hung on the line, broken only by what sounded like a bird hitting a window in Kevin's office. "A picture?" he finally stammered. "A mural," I corrected, "of the house, that the shed is behind, down to the last brick. So I just need the absolute best, most durable white primer coat you can give me." "Right," Kevin said, his voice now laced with the cautious tone one uses when speaking to someone who might be wearing a tinfoil hat. Of your house. On your shed. Okay, I'll have to work up a special quote for that. I'll email it to you." The quote arrived an hour later. It was for $8,000 for a one-day priming job. It was less a quote and more a polite way of saying, "Please lose my number, you magnificent weirdo." The second call, with a woman from Color Me Perfect, went similarly. She listened patiently before politely informing me that my project was outside the scope of their aesthetic vision and wished me the best of luck. I was starting to lose hope. Maybe I was doomed to paint the shed a soul-crushing beige. Maybe Brenda had already won. Dejected, I made one last call to a company whose website looked like it was designed in 1998. It was just a name, Barry's Painting and Contracting, and a phone number. No pictures of happy families in greige living rooms, just the promise of a job done right. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Barry?" "Hi, Barry. My name's Leo. I got your number online. I have a slightly unusual painting request." "Kid, I've been doing this for 30 years, he grumbled. "I've painted nurseries that look like alien planets, and I once had to paint a whole house to look like a giant watermelon for a guy who lost a bet. Try me." This was promising. I explained the situation. The shed, the HOA, Brenda, the letter, the malicious compliance. I laid it all out. For a full minute after I finished, the only sound was static. I thought he'd hung up. Then a low chuckle rumbled through the phone. It started small, then grew into a deep, wheezing, full-throated laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had seen the absurd underbelly of suburbia and had come to appreciate it. "She told you it had to match the house?" he finally gasped, catching his breath. "Those were her exact words," I confirmed. "And you're gonna paint the damn house on the shed? Kid, that's not just painting, that's poetry." Barry showed up an hour later. He was a man in his late 50s, built like a fire hydrant, with paint-splattered forearms and a face that looked like it had been carved from a particularly skeptical piece of wood. He drove a beat-up Ford Ranger that had clearly seen more action than most tanks. He walked around the shed, kicking it lightly with his work boot. He ran a hand over the metal siding. He looked at the house, then back at the shed, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Let me get this straight," he said, turning to me. "The HOA lady, this Brenda, got on your case about this thing." "She's the warden of this beige prison," I said, "and your big plan is to make it match by painting a picture of your house on it." "A hyper-realistic one," I clarified. "I want birds to try and fly through the painted windows." Barry slapped his knee and roared with laughter again. "Oh, that's beautiful. That's just beautiful. I've been painting houses in this town for 30 years, kid. I've dealt with a dozen Brendas. I've been waiting my whole life for a job like this. You're not just a homeowner, you're a damn artist, a warrior poet. Let's do it." He quoted me a price for the prep work that was not only reasonable, but downright cheap. It was clear this was no longer a job for him. It was a crusade. I had found my co-conspirator. The following Monday, Barry's beat-up Ford Ranger rumbled down Willow Lane, towing a trailer loaded with sanders, power washers, and cans of industrial-grade primer. He and his two-man crew, a couple of quiet guys who looked as weathered as he did, descended on my shed with the grim efficiency of a special ops team. The noise was glorious. The roar of the power washer stripping away the factory finish, the The screech of the sanders smoothing the metal, it was the sound of progress, a symphony of rebellion that echoed through the oppressively quiet cul-de-sac. Naturally, it drew attention. Todd from next door, my surgically precise lawn-mowing neighbor, parted his pristine vertical blinds to peer out, his face a mask of pinched concern. I gave him a cheerful wave. He did not wave back. He was almost certainly on the phone with the HOA's emergency hotline, which I imagined was just Brenda's personal cell number. A more welcome visitor appeared shortly after. Mr. Henderson, an elderly retiree from across the street with a twinkle in his eye and a magnificent white mustache, ambled over, leaning on a garden rake. "Morning, son," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Making a bit of a racket, aren't we?" "Just a little home improvement project, Mr. Henderson," I replied. "Heard about your run-in with Brenda at the meeting," he said, his twinkle intensifying. "My wife's on the social committee. Word travels. She's a piece of work, that one. Thinks covenants, conditions, and restrictions is the third book of the Old Testament." "You have no idea," I said. "So," he leaned in conspiratorially, "what's the plan? Going with the desert taupe she strong-armed you into?" I grinned. "Something like that. You'll have to wait and see." He chuckled. "Attaboy. This neighborhood used to have character. Before the HOA took all the fun out of it. Give 'em hell." He gave me a sly wink and ambled back to his own yard, a new spring in his step. I had my first ally on the ground. By the end of the day, my humble gray shed was transformed. Barry and his crew had worked magic. It was no longer a shed. It was a pristine, gleaming white monolith. A blank canvas of infinite possibility, sitting expectantly in the corner of my yard. "She's all yours, Rembrandt," Barry said, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd given me a crash course in the best types of weather-resistant, high-pigment exterior paints to use. "You call me if you need anything. And I mean anything. I want front-row seats to this." The next morning I began, armed with my tablet displaying my digital render, a high-powered projector for outlining the details after dark, and a small fortune's worth of paint in more shades of beige, brown, and white than I knew existed. I set up my command station on the patio. I started with the foundation. Meticulously, I began to paint the brick pattern. I didn't just paint red squares. I mixed custom colors to replicate the subtle variations in each individual brick. I painted the faded mortar, the tiny hairline cracks, the slightly darker shade on the north side where moss might one day dream of growing. It was slow, painstaking, meditative work. And I loved every second of it. Each brushstroke felt like a tiny victory. It took 2 full days just to finish the brickwork. On the 3rd day, as I was starting to lay down the base coat for the vinyl siding, the inevitable happened. Brenda appeared. She didn't walk. She glided across my lawn as if propelled by pure indignation, her pink blazer a vibrant slash against the sea of green. She came to a halt a few feet away, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed at the gleaming white shed. "Leo," she said, her voice dangerously sweet. "Brenda?" I replied with faux enthusiasm, turning around with a paintbrush in hand. "What a pleasant surprise." Her eyes scanned my setup. The cans of paint, the tablet, the general mess of a creative project. Her gaze settled on the section of the shed I was currently painting, a large beige rectangle. "I see you've decided to comply," she said, a flicker of smug triumph in her eyes. "Is that desert taupe?" "The one and only," I said, beaming. "It's a fantastic color, so much character. As you can see, I'm just getting the base coat down. I'm taking your note about matching very, very seriously. I want to get the color, the feel, just right. It's important to respect the aesthetic integrity of the community, after all. I laid that last line on as thick as the primer." Her suspicious expression softened, replaced by the self-satisfied look of a petty tyrant who has successfully bent the world to her will. "Excellent," she purred. "I knew you'd see reason. We're all about harmony here at Harmony Creek. Do carry on." She turned and glided away, victorious. I watched her go, a slow, wicked smile spreading across my face. I turned back to my canvas. She thought she'd won the battle. She had no idea I was painting a Trojan horse. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. I worked from home as a graphic designer, so my hours were flexible. Every free moment, mornings, lunch breaks, long into the evenings under the glow of the projector, I was out there, painting. The siding began to take shape, each painted panel perfectly mimicking the real thing. I painted the subtle shadows under the lip of each vinyl strip. I painted the plastic texture. I painted the reflection of the light. Maya, initially a worried observer, was now a full-blown co-conspirator. She'd bring me drinks, offer opinions on color mixes. That shadow needs a little more blue, don't you think? And act as a lookout for any approaching HOA-affiliated vehicles. My mad project had become our shared secret, a source of endless amusement that bonded us against the beige tide. The shed wasn't just a project anymore. It was our masterpiece. A week is a long time in suburbia. It's long enough for grass to grow just enough to violate code, for a new set of seasonal decorative flags to appear on every porch, and, in my case, long enough to paint a startlingly realistic front door and 2 full windows onto a metal shed. The illusion was starting to work. If you stood by the grill and squinted, the shed began to blend into the house behind it in a dizzying, perspective-breaking way. I had just finished adding the delicate reflection of a cloud in the upper pane of the right window when I saw Todd from next door standing by his fence, phone pressed to his ear, his face a perfect picture of apoplectic rage. He was gesticulating wildly toward my yard. He wasn't just reporting me to Brenda anymore. He had escalated. I knew this because 20 minutes later, a police car cruised slowly down Willow Lane and parked at my curb. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a new level of conflict. This was official. Maya appeared at the back door, her face pale. "Leo, what's going on?" "The fun police have arrived," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I put down my finest detail brush. Brenda's car was right behind them. Of course it was. She probably had a police scanner dedicated solely to HOA-related disturbances. She met the 2 officers on the sidewalk and began pointing animatedly at my shed, her expression one of grave concern, as if she were pointing out a hostage situation. I walked through my house and opened the front door just as the trio started up my driveway. There were 2 of them. One was older, with a thick mustache, and a world-weary sigh already forming on his lips. His name tag read Miller. The other was younger, taller, and had a look of intense curiosity. His name was Jenkins, and he was fighting a losing battle to keep a smirk off his face. "Afternoon," Miller said, his voice flat. He sounded like a man who had been called away from a very important donut. "We got a call about a public nuisance? Vandalism?" He glanced at Brenda, who nodded vigorously. "Officers, thank you for coming," she began, her voice quivering with manufactured outrage. "This man, Leo, is brazenly defacing his property in direct violation of community bylaws. It is a visual blight on our neighborhood." Miller's tired eyes drifted from Brenda's furious face, past me and into my backyard, which was visible from the driveway. He looked at my house, he looked at the shed, he looked back at my house. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "So, let me get this straight," he said slowly, turning to Brenda. "The complaint is that he's painting his shed?" "He's making a mockery of our community," Brenda insisted. "He was instructed to make his shed match the house. This is not what we meant." "Officer Jenkins, who had been silent until now, took a step forward, craning his neck for a better view. A small, unprofessional snort escaped his lips. He coughed to cover it up. "To be fair, ma'am," Jenkins said, his voice straining with politeness, "he was told the shed had to match the house. And I mean, you gotta admit, it really, really matches the house. Look at the detail on those shutters. That's impressive." Brenda shot Jenkins a look that could curdle milk. Miller pinched the bridge of his nose, the very picture of a man questioning his life choices. He turned his full attention to me. "Sir, is this your property?" "Yes, officer," I said calmly. "And that's your shed?" "It is." "And you're the one painting it?" "Guilty as charged." He let out a long, suffering sigh. "Brenda," he said, turning back to her, "is he breaking a law? A real, actual city ordinance law, not one from your book of beige commandments?" Brenda sputtered. "Well, it's a public nuisance. It's indecent." "It's a painting of a house, Brenda," Miller said, his patience worn down to a single frayed thread. "It's about as indecent as a postcard. We have actual problems to deal with." He looked back at me. "Sir, as far as I can tell, you're not breaking any laws. You're just aggressively following some of them." He tipped his hat. "Have a good day. Try to keep the art on your own property." He turned and walked back to the car. Jenkins lingered for a second. "Seriously, man," he whispered with a grin. "The reflection on the windows. That's genius." He gave me a subtle nod of approval before following his partner. They got in their car and drove away, leaving me on the driveway with Brenda, who was practically vibrating with impotent rage. Her face was the color of a ripe tomato. She stared at me, then at the shed, and then back at me. No words came out. She just made a strangled noise, spun on her heel, and stomped back to her car. I watched her go, a wave of pure, unadulterated triumph washing over me. I had won. I had been vindicated by the law, the actual law. Maya came out and threw her arms around me, laughing with relief. The legend of the shed house had officially begun. And the war was far from over. The story of the police visit spread through Harmony Creek faster than a gossip-fueled wildfire. Mr. Henderson had apparently watched the entire exchange from his porch, and by evening he was recounting the tale to anyone who would listen, complete with dramatic reenactments of Officer Miller's epic sigh. The neighborhood was divided. The pro-Brenda camp, led by Todd, saw it as a breakdown of social order. But a surprising number of residents saw it for what it was. Hilarious. People started finding excuses to walk their dogs down my street. Cars would slow down as they passed my house. I got a few thumbs-ups from passing drivers. I was no longer just the weird new guy from the city. I was the guy with the shed. The real tipping point, however, came from Maya. Initially mortified by the idea of public attention, she had been so buoyed by my victory over Brenda that she'd posted a few pictures of the shed's progress on her private social media page for a few close friends. The caption read, "My husband was told his shed had to match the house. I think he's taking it a little too literally. #HOA problems #malicious compliance." One of her friends, a woman with a substantial online following, asked if she could share it. Maya, caught up in the moment, said yes. That was the spark. The internet was the gasoline. Within 24 hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. It was picked up by a popular account that specialized in funny acts of petty revenge. From there, a local blogger wrote a short piece on it. And the next morning, as I was adding the finishing touches to the painted gutters, a white van with a giant Channel 8 News logo on the side pulled up to my house. "Oh no," Maya whispered from the doorway. "Oh yes," I said with a grin. A reporter, a ridiculously cheerful woman named Tiffany, and her world-weary cameraman hopped out. "Hi," she chirped, microphone in hand. "Are you the shed guy?" I was, it appeared, the shed guy. I ended up giving them an interview right there on my front lawn. I leaned against a tree, tried to look nonchalant, and gave them the whole story, deadpan. So, Leo, what motivated you to take on such an unusual project? Tiffany asked, pointing the microphone at my face. Well, Tiffany, I'm just a law-abiding citizen, I said, looking earnestly into the camera. I received a notice from my homeowners association that my shed needed to match my house. The rules are the rules. I believe in being a good neighbor and maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the community. I used Brenda's exact phrase, a little gift for her in case she was watching, which she absolutely was. But you have to admit, this is a very literal interpretation of that rule, she pressed. I'm a very literal guy, I said with a shrug. When someone gives me clear instructions, I follow them to the letter. They wanted it to match, so I'm making it match, perfectly. The story aired on the 6 o'clock news. It was a classic kicker segment, a light-hearted piece to end the broadcast. They showed close-ups of the shed, the detail on the painted brickwork, the reflection in the windows. They even got a no comment from a flustered Brenda, whom they'd ambushed while she was getting her mail. Then they showed my interview, my deadpan face explaining my commitment to following the rules. My phone started buzzing and didn't stop for 3 days. Friends from college, old co-workers, distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, everyone had seen it. The story was everywhere online. Suburban spat, man paints house on shed to comply with HOA rule. I had become a minor folk hero for every single person who had ever received a passive-aggressive note about their trash cans. Brenda and the HOA were being mercilessly ridiculed in the comments sections. Harmony Creek was famous, but for all the wrong reasons. This was no longer about a simple shed in my backyard. This was a full-blown public relations crisis for Brenda, and I knew with absolute certainty that her humiliation would not make her back down. It would only make her more determined to crush me under the full weight of the HOA bylaws. The war had just gone nuclear. The fame was fun for about a day. Then the other shoe dropped. It arrived not via the friendly neighborhood mail carrier, but via a courier who required a signature. It was a thick, flat-rate envelope with a return address for a law firm. Patterson, Finch, and Abernathy, specialists in community association law. My stomach lurched. This was the professional league. Inside was a 10-page document titled Cease and Desist. It was a masterpiece of legal jargon, a dense forest of whereas, heretofore, and pursuant to. I had to read each sentence 3 times to even begin to understand it. Maya and I sat at the kitchen table, the document spread between us like a dead squid. Boiled down, the HOA's lawyers were accusing me of a whole host of new violations. They claimed the mural was not a simple act of painting, but the creation of an unapproved artistic installation. They accused me of running a commercial enterprise from my home due to the media attention, which they argued was a form of self-promotion. My favorite part was the accusation that I was creating a public nuisance by attracting unwanted vehicular and pedestrian traffic, that is, people who wanted to see the shed. It was all wrapped up in a vague, catch-all violation of maintaining the intended character of the community. The letter demanded that I immediately cease all work on the mural and, within 14 days, paint the shed a single, solid, pre-approved color. Desert taupe was suggested, of course. If I failed to comply, I would be subject to daily fines of $100, plus any and all legal fees incurred by the HOA in their effort to enforce the rules. They were threatening to sue me into a beige-colored oblivion. The playful humor of the situation evaporated instantly. This was real. These were lawyers. The threat of 6-figure legal bills has a way of killing a joke pretty quickly. Leo, this is serious, Maya said, her voice tight with worry. We can't afford a lawsuit. Our savings, we just bought this house. She was right. For the first time, I felt a genuine stab of fear. Was this worth it? Was a funny protest, a middle finger to Brenda, worth risking our financial security? The image of standing in a courtroom, trying to explain my ironic mural to a stone-faced judge, was not appealing. This was the low point, the moment of doubt where the forces of conformity seemed to have me cornered. I looked out the window at my half-finished masterpiece. Giving up now would be more than just painting over it. It would feel like a surrender of my very soul. I'm not painting it beige, I said, my voice quiet but firm. There has to be a way. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I retrieved the massive 3-inch binder of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions they had given us at closing. It was the driest, most boring text known to man, but I was determined. Fueled by coffee and spite, I read the whole thing, cover to cover. I waded through endless clauses about lawn maintenance, fence heights, and the proper storage of trash receptacles. And then, at 3 a.m., buried in a subsection about property modifications, I found it. It was a small clause, clearly written by a lawyer to cover all bases. It stated that any permanent artistic installations, including but not limited to statuary and murals, required pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee. That was bad. But the next sentence was my salvation. It defined a project's completion as the final day of labor on said installation. My mural wasn't complete. It was a work in progress. They couldn't fine me for an unapproved finished mural if the mural wasn't finished. They had sent their legal attack dogs too early. It was a loophole, a tiny crack in their legal fortress. But it was all I needed. My resolve hardened. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. I could play dirty too. I knew I had to finish the mural before they could convene an emergency meeting and issue a formal stop work order. The clock was ticking. The next morning, emboldened, I took a picture of the cease and desist letter and posted it online next to a picture of the shed. I wrote, "The HOA sent in the lawyers. They say I have to stop. I say I have to finish. The annual block party is this weekend. Let's see if I can get it done." Then, on a whim, I added a link to a simple crowdfunding page with the title, "The Shed House Legal Defense and Final Touches Fund." I set the goal at a modest $5,000 to cover paint and a consultation with a lawyer. I went outside to start painting. When I came back inside for lunch an hour later, the fund was at $15,000. People were not just cheering me on anymore. They were funding my rebellion. The comments were a tidal wave of support. "Don't let the bullies win!" "This is for everyone who's ever gotten an HOA violation notice. Finish the masterpiece!" It was on. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a crusade, bankrolled by the internet. And I had a deadline. The day of the Harmony Creek annual block party dawned bright and oppressively sunny. The street was blocked off a few houses down from mine, and the air was filled with the smell of grilled hot dogs and the sound of forced merriment. It was my self-imposed deadline, my public stage. The entire neighborhood, and thanks to the local news, half the city, knew this was the weekend the shed guy was supposed to finish his work. The pressure was immense. For the last 48 hours, I had been working feverishly. Barry, my contractor turned ally, had stopped by with a high-powered work lamp so I could paint late into the night. "Don't you dare give up now, Rembrandt," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "The whole world's watching." Even Mr. Henderson had pitched in, acting as a one-man refreshment committee, bringing me lemonade and keeping me updated on Brenda's movements. "She's supervising the bounce house setup. Her face looks like she just bit into a lemon." As the block party got into full swing, a secondary party began to form on the sidewalk in front of my house. Neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers gathered, their cell phones held up to document the final stages. It was a bizarre, surreal scene. I was on a stepladder, my back to the crowd, focusing on the last few details. The house number, the subtle texture of the asphalt shingles on the roof. My hand was steady, my focus absolute. I could feel Brenda's glare from down the street like a physical force, but I blocked it out. This was my moment. Finally, it was done. The mural of my house was complete. It was perfect. The illusion was uncanny. I had painted every detail, every flaw, every bit of its beige, builder-grade character. The crowd murmured its appreciation. But I wasn't finished. There was one small, untouched white space left on the mural. It was on the painted wall of the house, in the exact spot where, if you were looking at the real house from this angle, you would see the shed. The crowd went quiet, sensing a finale. With a dramatic flourish, I took my tiniest detail brush. I dipped it in dark gray paint, and on the mural of my house, I began to paint a tiny, perfect, hyper-realistic mural of my original, non-compliant, dark gray metal shed. I painted the past onto the present, a permanent record of the violation that started it all. A wave of laughter and applause rippled through the crowd. They got it. It was the perfect, petty cherry on top. But I still wasn't finished. My heart was pounding with the thrill of it. I took an even smaller brush, a brush with about 3 hairs on it, and dipped it in a microscopic amount of beige paint. And then, on the tiny gray shed in the painting, I painted an infinitesimally small, hyper-realistic mural of my house. I had created an infinite loop of compliance, a Droste effect of suburban spite. It was a logic bomb, a meta-masterpiece. The shed now matched the house, and within that match, the original shed was preserved, which itself contained a match of the house. It was so ridiculous, so layered with meaning, that my brain almost short-circuited. I carefully placed my brush on the tray, took a deep breath, and stepped down from the ladder. The crowd erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a genuine ovation. People were laughing, cheering, shaking their heads in disbelief. I saw Officer Jenkins standing at the edge of the crowd, off-duty in a polo shirt, a massive grin on his face. He caught my eye and gave me a hearty thumbs up. Then, the sea of people parted. Brenda was marching toward me, her face a thundercloud of pure, unadulterated fury. Todd and a few other HOA loyalists trailed behind her like pilot fish. What have you done?" she sputtered, her voice trembling with rage. She was pointing at the tiny, nested painting within a painting. I dusted off my hands and gave her my most pleasant, helpful smile. "I'm finished, Brenda," I announced to her and the assembled crowd. "I have complied with the ordinance. As you can plainly see, my shed now matches my house." I gestured to the grand mural. And, as a testament to my commitment to the rules, the shed depicted in the painting also has a painting of the house on it, which, of course, matches the house it's painted on. It is, I believe, the most compliant structure in Harmony Creek history, possibly in the history of residential architecture. She stared, speechless. Her brain was trying to find a violation, a loophole she could use, but my logic was a recursive, unbreakable circle. "This is a mockery!" she finally shrieked. "You've made a mockery of the rules." "Lighten up, Brenda," Mr. Henderson called out from the crowd. "It's the best thing that's happened to this neighborhood in 20 years. A chorus of agreement rose up from the onlookers. Brenda's public support was visibly crumbling. Her authority was dissolving in real time. And then came the final, beautiful nail in her coffin. A well-dressed man stepped forward from the crowd, looking from the shed to me with an appreciative gleam in his eye. "Excuse me," he said, extending a hand. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm the curator at the Downtown Center for Contemporary Art. I saw your story on the news, and I have to say, this is brilliant. It's a masterful piece of suburban commentary. I'd love to feature a series of large-format photographs of it in our upcoming exhibition. The Uncanny Valley. Here's my card. He handed me a crisp, elegant business card. Brenda stared at it like it was a venomous snake. Her creation, her neighborhood, her rules, twisted into a piece of highbrow art that was going to hang in a gallery. Her defeat was total, absolute, and exquisitely public. She turned, wordlessly, and retreated through the crowd, which parted for her with a mixture of pity and glee. A month later, the dust had well and truly settled. The cease and desist letter was quietly rescinded. The HOA, facing a PR nightmare of epic proportions and the threat of a countersuit for harassment funded by my now famous Shed House Legal Defense Fund, had waved a very quiet, very white flag. The most delicious piece of news came via Mr. Henderson. Apparently, he had started a petition, citing conduct unbecoming of a committee president and bringing public ridicule upon the community. It called for a vote of no confidence in Brenda's leadership. Facing a humiliating ouster, she had been encouraged to step down from her throne on the Architectural Review Committee. Harmony Creek was, for the moment, free from her beige tyranny. Our lives settled into a new, stranger normal. The shed was a legitimate local landmark. We'd see people making detours down our street, slowing down to take pictures. Some would even get out and pose for selfies. Instead of being the neighborhood outcasts, we'd become its most famous residents. We started getting invited to backyard barbecues. Real ones, not the stilted HOA-sponsored affairs. We'd found our community, not in the forced conformity of the rule book, but in the shared laughter over the sheer absurdity of it all. The art exhibition was a huge success. A massive high-resolution photograph of the shed titled Compliance was the centerpiece. Maya and I attended the opening night, feeling completely out of place and utterly delighted. Barry and Mr. Henderson came with us, both dressed up for the occasion, beaming like proud fathers. Tonight, Maya and I are sitting on our patio, sipping beers and looking at my masterpiece. The evening sun hits it just right, making the painted reflections on the painted windows seem to gleam. It's objectively ridiculous. It's a monument to spite. It's the silliest and most wonderful thing I've ever done. Todd is still next door, still meticulously tending to his lawn, but his judgmental glares have lost their power. They just bounce off the shed's magnificent meta surface. The suburban quiet no longer feels oppressive. It doesn't sound like the death of creativity anymore. It just sounds peaceful. They said my shed needed to match my house. And it does. It just also happens to match my personality. A little too literal. A pain in the neck for anyone who takes themselves too seriously. And way more complicated than it looks from a distance. Turns out, I match Harmony Creek just fine. They just needed to adjust their color palette.